Welcome to FI Spotlight. I'm your host, Susan Choi. Each week, we will feature a special guest to provide insights on a relevant topic in the food and beverage industry. Today, we'll be focusing on regenerative agriculture. According to Regeneration International, this can be defined as, quote, farming and grazing practices that, among other benefits, reverse climate change by rebuilding soil organic matter and restoring degraded soil biodiversity, resulting in both carbon drawdown and improving the water cycle. This seems like a relevant practice today, as it can take, on average, hundreds of years for an inch of topsoil to form, according to the Soil Science Society of America. Here today, to guide us through the ins and outs of regenerative agriculture is 𝗟𝗶𝗴, co-founder and president of Wild Orchard Tea Company, which uses regenerative farming techniques in their tea production. Michael, thanks for joining us. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Susan. Really appreciate it.
The pleasure is ours. Let's get started by having you explain what is Wild Orchard.
Okay, so Wild Orchard is a brand that we formed about 4 years ago, but it goes way back beyond that. In the late 90s, a group of farmers and a visionary in South Korea, they decided to craft teas in the old world way, the pure teas, but in the context of today's environmental challenges. So they actually planted by seed on this beautiful island that you see. And it took about 10 years for it to grow. And finally, today, we're able to offer it to the marketplace. So we're extremely excited. We're making some strides. We're actually about to launch into Whole Foods, and we're in Michelin restaurants. So we're excited to bring this pedigree, this award-winning pedigree from which they planted the seeds with to today's marketplace for all tea lovers and people interested in tea.
And as you said, the beautiful island where your teas are generated, that is Jeju Island in Korea. Beautiful place. Michael, tell us, how does regenerative agriculture factor into Wild Orchard? What's the process for your own regenerative agricultural techniques, farming techniques? Share with us, explain to us that aspect.
I think you did a great job of defining it through some of the reputable regenerative bodies out there. But just to go a little further and a little more contextual in terms of how our farmers do it, it starts from the seed. It's a prize-winning seed that they took from another award-winning tea farm. And the soil is the key with regenerative. So organic is important in today's marketplace because it's void of GMOs, pesticides, synthetic chemicals. When we consume it, it's actually harmful for our cells and our health. But when we talk about regenerative, it goes beyond that. It goes into the health of the soil microbiome. And to put it simply for consumers and the general public, it results in a more nutrient-dense crop. So when we go to the grocery and we shop organic or conventional, we really don't know what the nutritional density is. But when we start to look at regenerative farming, you know that the nutrient density is much higher. So the quality and both the sustainability elements are really at the highest levels when we talk about regenerative organic.
And Michael, one thing from our personal conversations that was relevant to me is the fact that the term net positive comes into play. Usually, when we hear about companies that boast of their sustainable practices, they tend to say we are net zero. But here, I remember you were mentioning the phrase net positive. Can you get into that?
Sure. So the reason why regenerative has been trending for several years now in terms of brands, distributors, retailers, the great thing is now it's moving into the consumer consciousness. And I think the reason why it's so relevant today in the world that we live in is because regenerative is the new sustainability. Sustainability has always been about net zero, not making things worse. But as I explained before, when we focus on the health of the soil, the biodiversity of the ecosystem, the ecological factors like water pollution, water retention, that's what regenerative is. In a natural regenerative ecosystem, things are working as nature designed, and it's invigorating and regenerating the land to be a net positive. So as you defined earlier, it's actually pulling more carbon from the air, sequestering into the ground, more nutrient dense crops. And that's what we call a net positive. It's benefiting human health as well as environmental health. And I think because the younger generation is more attuned to these things, that's why regeneration and regenerative is finally moving from industry to the consumer consciousness.
One of the things that I also wanted to ask you about, Michael, is as we have seen with, for example, in things like alternative meat, alternative dairy, labeling issues, even within the organic industry, organic labels, there have been issues, maybe companies saying that they're one thing, but they're really not. Has that been a challenge when it comes to, really touting that you are in fact regenerative? Have you come across, how do you ensure, right, to your consumers that you really are what you say you are, in an environment and a time when, we have terms thrown up in the air like greenwashing? What's been your take and your strategy for Wild Orchard teas?
That's a great question. So as long as there's a marketplace, there's always going to be greenwashing. So consumers really have to know where the red flags are. And that's why certification is so important. What I tell people is there are a lot of great farms out there that do not invest in certification, but they do it the right way. But that's the minority. Most people are looking for shortcuts. We hear about olive oil. They say it's from Italy, but they mix in with other olive oils, lower quality, and they sell it as something much better than what it actually is. So the way that I like to frame it is there's a plethora of brands that are marketing. If you think about it in terms of jewelry, gold plated, right? So it looks like gold, but when you scrape off the gold plate, it's not real gold. And so consumers have to think about what is the real gold when it comes to marketing. So regenerative, when you have to go through the stringent certification process, that's something you trust because you have a third party coming to the farm. It's one of the most stringent certification processes, not only on soil health, but animal welfare and farm worker fairness. And only when you go through that stringent certification process can a consumer say, oh, it has this very high standard. It was audited. It was certified. I can trust this. So that's one major way to kind of not be subject to greenwashing and buying a product that's different than what you think you're getting.
Taking sort of a step back and looking at Wild Orchard from a business perspective, Michael, what's your ultimate goal for the company? Do you want to be a scaling beast, and do you want to sell out to? Are you looking for big partners to come in with you and put Wild Orchard in every supermarket shelf? Do you are you looking for that big buyout? What's the goal here for Wild Orchard?
So nothing bad about someone who raises a lot of money, scales it, sells it off. All kudos to them. They're able to provide for their families. But this is another way that people can discern if a brand has uh, values that anchor everything that they do. We call it the North Star, right? So if you look at a brand that has a North Star whose mission is to protect people's health, protect the environment, then it's not really about growth. It's not really about like selling it off. We specifically at Wild Orchard, we want to keep growing and build a generational and impactful brand that's going to continue to help people live healthier way beyond when I leave this earth. So that's kind of the mindset we have. So we have a very slow growth, profitable mindset. We want to be around for a long time. We don't want to try to go for the stars and get as many retail stores and then all of a sudden our balance sheet is not in line with our values. So that's just where we are. And Patagonia is a wonderful example for us. Their whole company is about making Earth its major shareholder. And we definitely look to brands like that to emulate.
Passion, purpose, intentionality behind the brand. That sounds like it, it sounds like you might say that those are kind of the keys behind the success of, and the drivers behind Wild Orchard. Is that what you would encourage to, fellow CPGers out there? What would you say is the best piece of advice you could give, from your experiences, getting this company off the ground to our viewers out there who are maybe in a similar position?
So we're definitely in a different landscape than even 2-3 years ago, where capital was much more readily available. So it's much more conducive to someone following the trend, raising money, and selling off and exiting. Like I said, there's nothing wrong with that. But today, the capital has dried up. So if you're going to build a CPG brand, I think you better have a strong foundation, and it's got to appeal to especially the new Gen Z consumers that are going to continue to grow. And if you don't have a mission and a vision that's clearly understood that can benefit people and the planet, it's going to be very challenging. So I would recommend new CPG people who are looking to create a CPG brand really focus on the anchor, the North Star first. Make sure all decisions, hiring, partners, product innovation, all run through that lens. And I think you'll be on the right track to creating a generational company, which we aspire to do.
All right, Michael Ham, co-founder and president of Wild Orchard Tea Company. Michael, thank you so much again for joining me.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
And as always, you can check out all the great content that we've done by clicking on this playlist. Till next time, I'm Susan Choi. Take care and have a great weekend.